Welcome. Okay, just gonna get started here. So if you're on TikTok, go ahead and tap the screen, share the live. Welcome everybody. Cookie Monster joined, welcome. Yes, I baked a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies today, so they were really good, so I got into them, so it's funny. So welcome. All right, I'm doing great, Walter. How are you? All right. So today we are, sorry, I have something in my eye. We're going to go through dealing with anxiety. And we're going to talk about some pretty tough subjects tonight, so stick around. For those of you that are just joining in, this is your first time on my channel. My name is Tina. I am a happiness coach. I help people go from being in an anxious, depressed, or suicidal state and finding their way to happiness. I've traveled this path many times myself, and I do this by sharing my experience, strength, and hope in order to give you tools to help you find a way to be able to move to a happier place. Okay. My goal is to be able to help 1 million people heal past trauma. So if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, any of those kind of things. If you're on TikTok, go ahead, tap the screen, share some energy. If you have questions, type those in the chat. If there's certain things that you want help with or that you're struggling with, let me know those things so that I can create a training. So today's training was because somebody was brave enough to share with me that they wanted some help with anxiety and dealing with anxiety. And so that is going to be the topic for tonight. And it's quite funny because most of the time people don't see me as somebody who's anxious. They see me as somebody who's fairly confident, and I'm able to pull that off most of the time. However, this was not always the case for me. I struggled. Hey, welcome. I'm not saying your name. I'll just call you T. All right. Welcome. So I struggled with this, having been a sexual abuse survivor, being abused from the ages of 4 years old until I was 19. That's your maiden name, okay? Either way, I'm not going to say that on my live. So having been through those experiences, when I first started in my healing recovery journey, I still have this a little bit when it comes to going to social settings. I struggle with those a little bit more. I can do a live talking to people online in the internet. It's not as difficult as a face-to-face meeting, and those were a little bit more challenging because of some of the physical challenges that I had. I had a lazy eye. I was obese, still am, but working in the right direction, minus the cookies I got into today. And just this general sense of anxiety and direction, minus the cookies I got into today. And just this general sense of anxiety. And I remember going to this barbecue years ago. I got invited to a backyard barbecue, and a bunch of friends, bunch of people were going to be there, which is not my happy place. Telling me that there's going to be a bunch of people, if you want me to come, tell me there's like 2 or 3 people coming, and it's like no big deal. It's like, oh, okay. And I know those people and I can talk to those people. Yeah, sure, I'll go. A bunch of people I don't know in an environment that's loud that I don't know anybody. Especially if it's difficult to talk, because how I make my connections with people is the ability to talk with them. So you put me in an environment where it's just physical appearance, and I'm not going to win. And so so those were always challenges for me. But anyway, going to this barbecue, I wanted to cancel so bad, but everybody kept encouraging me. They kept really wanting me to show up, and because I I think they had invited me to a couple of restaurant gatherings or something like that a few times before, and I didn't want to go to those either. And it was because I just didn't feel adequate. I didn't feel good enough. And I had a lot of anxiety around, what do I say? What if I say something stupid? All of these really strange things went through my head. And so going to this barbecue, I remember walking up the driveway and I felt like I had 2 cement bricks on my feet, and it was like trying to slag my way up the driveway. And so many times I just wanted to turn around and run away. And I managed to force myself up. And just as I was about to turn around, somebody saw me and they're like, "Hey, Tina's here, yay." And then I went in and then everything was fine. But I was fairly anxious with that. And I remember talking with a friend of mine about that experience, and they were talking about the part of what happens if you've been through sexual abuse, or if you have been through PTSD of any form, whether that's CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's growing up in a traumatic environment where there's alcoholism, drugs, violence, sexual abuse, neglect, any of those kind of things. So growing up in those kind of environments, they found that there's also correlations with combat veterans, so PTSD, that they've experienced. And so there's a lot of correlations, and being able to deal with these things is important. And I remember reading, if you guys haven't read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, I would highly recommend that book. It does talk about the correlation between obese women and sexual abuse, and also similarities to what combat veterans have gone through. And so my knowledge on what combat veterans actually experience is very limited, but having gone through what I've been through, I did relate to some of the stories. And one of the stories in that book talked about a veteran who had experienced his entire squad or platoon, I'm not sure which they call them, but they all got killed, shot all around him. All of his friends, his colleagues, all dead. And that in and of itself is hugely traumatic. But how he responded to it was the biggest part of where that trauma sinks in and the shame digs into your soul, is because he, in rage, and rage is uncontrollable hurt. So if you experience that kind of rage and wrath, it is because you've been hurt so badly, so deeply to the core that something in you snaps. And he basically went and murdered and raped civilians in the village that was nearby where the threats came from. So he killed the guys that killed his colleagues, and he also went that further part. And he felt an incredible amount of shame for that, because at the end of the day, when you've done something like that, and survivors feel this kind of guilt and shame along with what they've experienced, because there's a part of you that when something like that happens, so from a sexual abuse survivors, if a lot of survivors, during the abuse, they also experience pleasure, and that ends up being a whole mind fuck. And it creates these deep feelings of shame and believing that somehow that you must have created this experience for yourself, that you're to blame. And whether that's you sought attention because you just liked being around somebody. And I know there was a lot of neglect in my household because my mom was a single mom. She worked a lot. And when she was around, she didn't have a whole lot of energy for us. So oftentimes I would seek out attention from whoever would give that to me. And even if that meant allowing them to touch me. And I had a lot of shame around that. And I also learned that there weren't, not, so it's a double-edged sword, because part of it is a protection mechanism, because some of them, if I had fought back, I probably would have been dead. And if I hadn't, and if I allowed that and I'm able to appease them in some way, then I was able to get certain things that I wanted that otherwise were withheld from me. So dealing with the whole shame around that, it's something that is extremely difficult to talk about. It's really hard when you first go to share that, because there's a part of you at your core believes that it's your fault. And although intellectually you know that it's not your fault, and people can tell you it's not your fault. And I remember breaking down to my therapist and I was saying, you know, then why do I feel like the entire world is lying? I know technically it's not my fault. And one of the rare times she got extremely firm with me and she gave me shit. And she was like, Tina, you weren't even 10 years old. You did not have the cognitive ability to give consent for what was being done to you. Even if, because my abuser, he liked to make me ask for it. He liked to say, you asked for it. This was because of you. You did this. And he'd always deflect that blame so that he didn't have to own the responsibility for what he was doing. And so consequently, I'm extremely sensitive when people manipulate, when people lie, and I have a huge aversion to that kind of stuff. And I call that shit out. Huge. So, and I'm completely unapologetic about it. Because I can see that at very subtle levels because of what I had experienced with this narcissistic, manipulative abuser that knew how to play these mental games of how to get people to do certain things that he wanted them to do, and he would just be very vicious and abusive of it and sit back and laugh. That's what I experienced. For example, this one time, he worked with my uncle. They were in construction. And I knew something had gone on, and this had been after a period of where there was a lot of activity, where he was regularly touching me. And something happened at work that him and my uncle got into a fight, and he came home with this huge black eye. And he made the point of making sure that I dressed up in my prettiest dress, and then I had to come sit on his lap with the black eye. And he took a Polaroid picture, and he sent that to my uncle. I didn't know what was going on at the time, but now looking back, there must have been some sort of argument, some sort of confrontation that happened about what was going on with me. And I think he did that picture as a way to deliberately rub it in my uncle's face. And this is the kind of environment I grew up in. This is the kind of shame that I ended up feeling. So I hadn't addressed any of those kind of things. So with all of this stuff buried deep inside, and you don't actually deal with it, you don't actually process it, you don't make the connection that, hey, this thing that happened to you as a child is part of the reason why you're not comfortable going to this event and you feel anxiety at a barbecue. So it was slowly but surely, I ended up as I was going through the layers. Sorry, where did you buy them from? Buy what from? So as I was going through the layers and digging through and understanding the layers of shame that are tied around that, the scrubs, I don't understand what you're talking about, but you're being annoying, so. Actually, you're being more than annoying, you're being an ass. We're talking about some pretty deep shit here, and you're just being a jackass. There we go, goodbye. Fuck. Okay, so going through the various layers of shame and dealing with this stuff, it was really important to be able to have safe people to talk with this about, to open up of what was going on, and being able to draw the connections back because they don't seem obvious at first. And so how I tie this back to the combat veteran is the shame that he felt, because when he did that, it breaks something in your psyche of now whoever you thought you were as a good person, and then you've gone and behaved in a certain way. Same thing with survivors, sexual abuse survivors. If you behaved in a certain way, you sought that kind of attention, no matter what you do, you can't seem to reconcile. So you have this discrepancy, you have this core belief that there's something wrong with you, that you're not good enough, that you're shameful, that you've behaved in this certain way. And then it's tied into all the shame anchoring you down, pulling you down. And no matter how hard you work at trying to be a good person, you can never really fully feel that until you start to address those root causes, break the chains that are holding you down, and that allows you to become free with that kind of stuff. And until you start doing that inner work, you will often feel a sense of anxiety. And this often comes from a sense of, if people knew the truth, what would they really think? And this is why it's really important, and why they say you're only as sick as your secrets. So even if nobody else knows the things that you've done or the things that you've even thought, okay, you know them on some level. You know the truth, and you can't really hide it from yourself. Now, there's things that you can do to kind of block it out and tune it out, and that can be with drugs, alcohol, or any other kind of addictions, food, all of those kind of things. You can desensitize yourself and numb the feelings, and that's just delaying. That's delayed gratification done the wrong way. So that is delayed gratification done in the wrong direction. And what that does is it causes you to hold off. You compartmentalize all these feelings. This feeling sucks. I'm not going to feel it. I'm going to put it in this box. I'm going to keep putting it in this box, in this box. And then next thing you know, that box is overflowing and it explodes. And then you have a whole mess that you have to clean up. So oftentimes these feelings of anxiety end up coming from this sense of shame that is unaddressed. This sense of, if people knew the truth about me, then what would happen? And maybe you had tried to talk about something and somebody weaponized that and they used that against you, and that made it even worse, right? Because I know that happened for me, because every time I tried to speak up, or even when I did speak up about what was going on, nothing was done. And that compounded the sense of not feeling good enough. So this feeling of constant anxiety that I felt, of never feeling good enough, feeling like I had to work twice as hard just to feel half as good as a normal person. And even then, that wasn't enough. I was always, I developed at least a fairly decent coping mechanism of being an overachiever and being a perfectionist and being a workaholic. So those are all fairly good coping mechanisms in the relative spectrum of isms that you can have. However, it was still quite damaging. And so one of the ways that I had dealt with it was food. So I ate a lot and I gained a lot of weight. I was up to almost 400 pounds at one point. And it's funny, I've had some pictures come up from just 2 years ago, and I was like, wow. I was like, oh, I've really changed. I've really changed quite a bit. I've dropped quite a bit of weight, over 100 pounds in the last 2 years. And it's like, I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. Not where I want to be just yet, but I'm doing way better than I was. So, and when back in 2002, I had gone from about 320 pounds and I had dropped down to about 220. And so it's not the first time I've lost 100 pounds, so it's like not a big deal. It's like I've been up and down this scale so many times. And mostly because I didn't realize I thought it was all lack of discipline, not following the right program, not doing the right things, not the right exercises, all this kind of stuff. And I didn't realize that there's a trauma link to obesity. And once I started to address that, and I started to address what I needed to be happy within, and it wasn't till I had a coach that actually encouraged me, and that happened a couple of years ago. And just from that encouragement, that sense of feeling safe, weight started to come off, and I wasn't really even trying, and that was like really cool. So that I'm extremely grateful for that. So, but when I lost that weight the first time back in 2002, something strange that I had noticed, because I had always considered myself a fairly calm person, and I was, you couldn't really rattle me easy. I was the one with the level head, good head on her shoulders, very calm. And then I lost a bunch of weight, and I wasn't using food to cope with the feelings. And all of a sudden, I became extremely fucking anxious. And it was really funny because I was with a friend of mine, and normally I was the calm, cool cucumber, and she was like the panicked one all the time. Like she was always like Bill the cat, right? She was like really nervous. And it was funny that we had flipped roles, and it was like, oh, it's because I had lost all this weight and I wasn't using food to squish down the feelings and to cope with the feelings. And then I had this whole burst of stuff come up of dealing with this anxiety. So sometimes the anxiety you end up feeling can be a result of making a change externally. So that could be changing your job, it could be changing your food, your exercise routine, it could be a bunch of different things. When you make those changes, but then you don't address the emotional side of things, all of a sudden, whatever you were using before to cope, now you have these emotions come up to the surface because it's thinking that you're now safe enough to start dealing with these things. And now this is the time that you have to deal and look at those old wounds, whatever those challenges that you were facing. Now, anxiety can come for a few different reasons. Some of this is because you have certain expectations. So sometimes it's not even a bad thing. Sometimes anxiety comes from something good, and it's more excitement, but it's also fear that the thing that you want is not going to happen. That like maybe you're going for your third interview on a job and you're like, oh, I really, really want this and I'm excited, but what if I screw it up? What if I do this? What if it doesn't go the way that I think that it goes? And one of the ways that I found that is helpful for me to deal with that is whatever the worst case scenario is, imagine that is what actually happens. Your absolute worst, like you do there's a couple of scenarios. So job interview example, okay? So you go, you do your best, you give it everything you've got, and you still don't get it. And then you feel bummed out and you're like, ah, man, I didn't get the job. Now what do I do? And being able to understand what you would do should that situation occur allows you to know that there's a pattern, that that part is not the end. It's not, you didn't die from it. There's a next step. It's like, okay, well, what would you do? Well, you try for this other job that you were thinking of, or you would take that as, you know what, I'm not giving up. I'm going to try again and again and again, right? So you can at least formulate some sort of plan of what's the contingency if you're not able to follow through, if you don't hit the target or goal that you've set, the thing that you want to achieve. Detaching from the outcome. Sorry, before we get into that. So that is assuming you do everything great. So sometimes the anxiety comes from, what if I mess this up? What if I go into this and I completely foobar? Fucked up beyond all recognition for those of you that don't remember the Mel Gibson movie. So imagine you go in and instead of performing exactly the way that you thought you were going to do, you just bomb it. You're like Bambi on ice. You completely mess everything up. And so then what do you do? For me, I look at that, it's like, wow, when you're going to fail, if you're going to do anything, go big or stay home, right? If you're going to bomb it in a spectacular way, right? At least you'll have an amazing story, something funny, because you won't die from it, but you'll be able to, say, hey, you know what? I really screwed this up. So on the lines of job interviews, I hadn't been for a job interview in like 10 years. I was with this first company and I started to go on job interviews, and complete dumbass that I was so nervous. I wasn't cluing into who the audience that I was communicating with. And in the interview with a manufacturer, I began telling inside stories because they were asking for examples of times that I have been challenged, and I was young and I was dumb. And basically I started criticizing those manufacturer types, and I'm like, I walked out of that interview and I'm like, how fucking blonde do you have to be to have done that? Oh my God. I couldn't believe, because I knew better. I knew that I shouldn't do that, but stuff just came out of my mouth. So I don't know if it was like nerves or what, but basically I criticized the manufacturer types to a manufacturer that I was trying to get hired by. Dumb ass. Lesson learned. Never did that again. But so sometimes you can have hugely epic fails and still survive. So understanding that the anxiety that you feel and giving into it, envisioning what if the worst case scenario happens. Like, write it out, see it in detail. How are you going to deal with that should that situation come up? And I find that being able to do that actually helps you go, okay, you know what? I'm not going to die. I can see, okay, these kind of things could happen. And then I could see it's going down a wrong track. Oftentimes, just being able to pre-plan that prevents you from truly doing the thing that you're afraid of. Okay. Another thing. This will be another thing where my worst fears actually ended up happening. So I was back in college, I was taking computer programming, and this often will contribute to your anxiety as well, so I was going through a lot where I was taking a lot of different courses for the computer programming. I was nervous about money. My husband at the time, he had lost his job, and I was on student assistance. So it's like, how are we going to pay for the stuff that we need, right? You know, we've got a mortgage payment, we've got utilities, we've got car payments, we have all these things, and our income, it was already stretched to the max with me on a student budget and him working full time, and then he lost his job. So there was all this anxiety that was happening. And so I wasn't sleeping properly, wasn't eating properly, stressed out. All of these projects due as we were getting closer to the final exams. And and I was doing well in the classes, and I was taking, I think it was JavaScript. And I was going through it, and I went into the class like with a really high mark. I think it was like 95 or something like that. And I went into the exam and I thought, this is going to be easy. It's one of the exams I didn't fully study a whole lot about because I felt confident enough. I'm like, every time I did an assignment, it was fairly easy. But I didn't sleep the night before. I was running late. I got in a few minutes late, so I was already shaving time off of the exam. And so now I came in all anxious, and I read the question quickly, I started coded a bunch of stuff, did a great job at it, and then I went to go back to double check, and I realized I completely misread the exam question, and all of the stuff I coded was completely wrong, and I was out of time. So I got some partial marks, but I basically failed the exam. But because my marks were so high in the beginning, I still passed the course. But the fact that I failed the exam was devastating for me. I hadn't planned for that. But sometimes the anxiety that we feel is some of it is external conditions. So we want to be able to try and control or mitigate those external conditions as much as possible. So making sure we get enough sleep, taking care of our body, get enough sleep, get enough water, get enough proper nutrition and activity, outside time, those kind of basic body needs, right? When we do that, that helps in and of itself. So also if you're eating a lot of sugary stuff, a lot of carbs, all that kind of stuff. So when you start to feel anxious, you tend towards whatever your comfort foods are, or whatever your comfort vices are. And that ends up being counterintuitive. So when you are feeling that anxiety, to really double down on making sure that you are feeding your body proper nutrition so that it has a fighting chance to deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. So you can also take nutritional supplements that help with anxiety or ADHD type things, any of those kind of things. I do take some, they do help a little bit, but I find that sleep is the number one thing. Preparation too. So it doesn't matter how good you are if you don't feel like you have properly prepared for things. Now, don't overdo it where now you've kind of freaked yourself out. Because after I failed the JavaScript exam, I overdid it on the web development exam, and I really was preparing for that, and I wanted to make sure I got a good sleep. My husband at the time, he was feeling so anxious about it that he ended up having heart palpitations, and we had to take him to the hospital because he was anxious about my exams. And so because of that, I ended up having to reschedule my exam because we were stuck in the ER all night. So anxiety sometimes can be transferred. So what I was doing is I was squishing all my feelings down. I was wanting to get a good sleep, but he ended up waking me up when he came to bed, and then I couldn't get back to sleep. And then he started getting stressed out by that. And then we ended up having to go to the hospital because he felt this tightening in his chest. So anxiety, those are different things that can end up causing anxiety, and being able to look at and understand exactly what is it that is causing the anxiety. So you need to be able to reflect on it. Is it that you're really fixated on a particular outcome happening? And if that outcome doesn't happen, you're afraid of that. Then what, right? Maybe it's shame, maybe it's embarrassment, maybe it's all these different things. Maybe it's you don't know what to do next if that doesn't fall through the way that you were hoping for. Maybe sometimes the anxiety comes from you're doing this because it's not something that you really want to do, but you're doing it because you feel like you're supposed to do that. I've seen people in different jobs. There was a woman that I worked with. She did a job and she was always anxious, and it didn't matter what we did in the job. It just wasn't something that fulfilled her, but she couldn't let that go because she wanted her parents to be impressed that she was doing this corporate job, right? And so because of that, she was always anxious. She never felt good enough because she was also dealing with the shame and everything because of if this doesn't work, then her parents would see her as a failure. So if you're feeling those anxious feelings, you want to pay attention to the word track that's happening in your mind. What are the things that you are actually saying to yourself? What are you telling yourself? Write those things down. Give your fears a voice by writing them down and then being able to actually look at what is going on in your own mind, because sometimes we're freaking ourselves out and we don't realize that we're doing it. When you start to look at the words that you've wrote down, the next thing that you want to do is tie that back to where did you first hear that? Maybe you're telling yourself you're not good enough, you're worthless, you never do anything right. Whatever it is that's going on that's causing you to feel this anxiety, being able to look at that and understand what is going on there. Where did you first hear that? Whose voice do you hear that in? Is it multiple voices? Is it one voice? Was it a parent? Was it an uncle? Was it a sibling? Whatever it was, right? So pay attention to where those negative voice tracks come from. And this is a good opportunity to be able to look at that, understand where did this come from, and then you can start to challenge that belief that has been anchored in on you because somebody else somewhere along the line planted a seed. Maybe it was kids that laughed at you when you did a presentation or something like that. Whatever it may be, you want to be able to understand, where does this anxiety come from? What is it that you are telling yourself is going to happen if things don't go the way that you hope for, right? So, like, are you doing are you doing a Chicken Little maneuver? And Chicken Little was a little cartoon character that used to run around saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling, and that wasn't actually the case, but he had himself so freaked out believing that the sky was going to fall that that was his reality. So the truth is irrelevant. Your opinion is all that matters. So if you keep telling yourself that you're not going to do well, that you're going to screw this up, this is going to be a mess up, and it's going to be horrible and all of this stuff, then you're starting to create that reality within yourself. You're programming yourself to behave in that particular way that will draw that to you. Now, being able to look at that stuff and critically analyze the thoughts that you are telling yourself and understanding where are those voices coming from. If it is the voice of an uncle or an aunt or a mom or dad or a sibling or a teacher or a friend, see if that is the case right now. Is that person around? What would you want to tell them, right? And you can start to fight back. And what I would do in the early stages when I first started to become aware of this is the first thing I would do is every time I catch myself going down that path, I would tell myself to stop. That's all I could do was just say stop. And then it's like of course, it would find little sneaky ways to kind of come through and get creative and tell me that I wasn't good enough or whatever, because I started to kind of clue in. But I started to really fight back and talk back to that internal voice that was going on. And I would say, stop, don't do that. I'm not listening to you. Shut up, go away, all of that kind of stuff. I don't want to hear this. This is not appropriate. I'm not talking to you. Like, and I would kind of have that back and forth conversation, and I treated it like it was an external voice, because technically it was. Because why would, well, as a survivor, a lot of times the reason we do that to ourselves, like kids who've grown up in traumatic environments, they take all of the blame, all of the criticism from their abusers, and they take that on themselves, because that allows them to feel like they have some sense of control over the situation, which technically they don't, but it's the illusion of control that we're looking for that helps us feel safe. That maybe if I didn't say this, or if I didn't do that, or if I didn't come home late from school, then they wouldn't have been mad and this is all my fault. Or, you know, maybe if I cleaned up the room the way that I was supposed to, maybe if I had taken care of my cat, they wouldn't have put her down, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's different ways that we try to find a way to feel like we're in control. And that's something that's important. Even infants, they've studied infants that with toy manufacturers, and infants that played with toys that seemed to respond to their movements were much more engaging for the baby, because it made that infant feel like they had some sense of control, that when I moved my hand or I made a sound, that the thing, whatever the toy was, responded to their action, therefore making them feel they had some sort of sense of control. So that speaks to another way of being able to deal with the anxiety, is finding a way, how would you feel more in control of the situation? So if you are prepping for an exam or an interview or anything like that, what do you need to do to feel like you are more in control? Do you need to put in more practice time? Do you need more feedback? Do you need to, get some additional assistance, whatever it was? I know when I was doing that computer programming, I needed help brushing up my math skills, and I stayed in the math tutor room. I'd go from after my 8 a.m. class, it went from 8 till 9, and then from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. when they closed up the math tutor room, I stayed in there and I just did problem after problem after problem, trying to get these quadratic equations and all of this stuff down, because I hadn't done it in years, and trying to get a grasp of it. So not just going through the motions, but trying to understand why I was doing what I was doing, why was this important, and understanding the meaning behind it. Because I found that was much more important than just trying to memorize, well, when you see this, do this, right? Of understanding why I was doing what I was doing. And when you do that, it helps you prepare a little bit better. The why is really important. Why are you doing what you're doing? And looking at how much pressure, unnecessary pressure, are you putting on yourself? So for example, like I used to stress out about the grades, and I had this mindset that from when I was a kid, that anything less than an 80 was an absolute failure. And a friend of mine who had been going to university, and she was taking some courses and stuff like that, and she was like, Tina, you need 50% to pass the course, and nobody looks at your fucking grades once you've actually got your degree. So just do whatever you have to do. Don't worry that you didn't get 80. So I had put all this crazy pressure on myself that I didn't need to. I just needed to get it done, right? It didn't have to be perfect. So removing the need for perfection, the need for just having it go a certain way. Hey Mark, good to see you. welcome back. To make sure that you are just putting in that work and not putting this crazy pressure on yourself. Because some of our best, most entertaining stories happen when we fail in the most epic way. And even when you're trying to do something really, really good, it's the things that kind of go wonky. Those are the things that you actually remember. And it's like, oh man, yeah. Like a friend of mine, when she was getting married, she had a beautiful wedding. She had a princess dress. She looked amazing. And her and her guy, they've been together for years. And I can remember her looking so happy. And at the wedding, this is one of the things that everybody remembers. As they were signing the paperwork, she had leaned over and she had bent down. Her veil caught on fire from the candle that they lit, and they had to quickly put it out. It wasn't disastrous, but it's one of those things that ended up being the most memorable from the ceremony. Otherwise, everything went off flawless as expected, and definitely not as memorable as her veil catching on fire, right? So everybody was talking about that at the reception, and it was just one of those things that was quite funny, that it could have been way worse. It was a mild hiccup, but it was that mild hiccup that everybody remembers. And I remember too, along those lines too, just to help take some of the pressure off the anxiety, right? I want to talk a bit about my grandmother. When my grandmother passed away, she had so many people at her funeral. So many people truly loved her. She was a tough woman too. She was tough as nails. She was a psychiatric nurse. She had a heart of gold, but she was tough, man. Oh, loved her. And everybody says I'm a lot like her. And I at least have her cooking skills. I wish I had her organization and her cleaning skills. That would be great. I'm not too bad, but my brother spent way more summers and he cleans and has everything meticulous just like her. But so my grandmother, when she passed away, everybody was at her funeral, and so many people got up and they shared stories. And the stories that they shared had us in tears. We were laughing so hard. And none of them, and I'm sure she would be like, you know what? I really wanted them to talk about this time that I did this executed flawlessly. No, it was the times of, like, there was one story of where she had the runs and didn't quite make it to the bathroom. Those were the stories of just how she handled it with humor and grace and stuff like that ended up happening. Those were the stories that got told. You don't get to choose the stories that people are going to tell about you when you pass away. So don't worry about the mistakes that you made and the epic failures and all the goofy stuff humans do, because that's what makes us fun. That's what makes life worth living, is all those goofy mistakes where we screw things up, but we're not doing it intentionally. We're just being human and being goofballs, honestly. So when we do that and we can embrace that, that often takes a lot of that pressure off and allows us just to be at peace with who we are and allows us to be happier, right? That it's the little things, right? Now, I'm not saying to mock ourselves or anything like that, but shit happens, man. We all do stupid stuff. We're all like, yeah, just be okay with that kind of stuff. And that takes a lot of the pressure off, relieves a lot of the anxiety. And those are the things that people remember about you anyway. So make sure that whatever story you're writing, it's a good one, that it's an epic one, it's a fun one, that people have stuff to say about you. Who cares, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the love that people feel for you, the connection that they had with you, those stories, those memories that matter. And going through your life doing everything perfect is not the thing that they're going to talk about. They're going to talk about, remember the time that this happened. Whatever, insert whatever problem, catastrophe, disaster, and I think of the times of just even work colleagues. It's like the ones that I was bonded to the strongest, and it's probably a trauma bond, but whatever, trauma bonds are good. I'll take those friendships. Those are the experiences that it's like, yeah, we went through this really fucking hard time together, but we got through it. We laughed like maniacs. Like, I remember a friend of mine, we were working together and we ended up getting short staffed. We went from like 6 or 8 people on the team, and it was just down to the 2 of us for weeks on end, having to do the work of 8 people with just the 2 of us. And then we got told, it's like, well, you're doing a fine job. None of the customers is complaining. We were burnt out. And it wasn't until I was like, I had done some healing work and I was like, yeah, fuck this shit. I'm out. No, I'm going off on stress leave for 2 weeks. Guess what? They had to bring in 3 other people just to replace me. And then they brought in some additional people and they got us the staff that they needed. And I came back in like a week. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but I got my point across, right? So, but during that time, this friend of mine, this other coworker, we hadn't been that close, but man, did we get super freaking close during that time. And we developed a really, really strong friendship for many, many years. And we have so many stories to tell because of what we went through together. So those are things that are really powerful, that don't be afraid to mess some of the things up. Don't be overly anxious about things, because that's where the fun comes in. And that's what makes life worth living, right? Is those fun stories of the times that we messed it up and we're still here to talk about it. So, and if you can laugh about it, that's even better. So whether it's huge trauma that you faced, or it's the little challenges in life that make us uncomfortable, no matter what it is, we do have the ability to get through it if we do some of that inner work, that reflection, and be able to talk with people in a way that, with people that are safe to actually talk with, to open up with, and that you can communicate and get the support that you need. Because those words that people share with you are the things that stick in your mind. So just as you can have those negative voices or negative seeds that get planted in your mind that cause you to feel not good enough, and you can go back and uproot those weeds and get rid of them and break the chains that are holding you down. It's also the positive things, right? So the people that have been there to support you, their voices are just as strong in your mind. Their presence is just as strong. Their soul, the time that you guys shared together, is just as strong and enduring if we choose to focus on that. And I know there's been many people throughout my life that have helped me at times where I felt anxious. And because I had the courage to actually share what I was feeling anxious about, they were able to give me their insight, their perspective, their objective opinion, because they didn't feel the emotions that I was feeling. They could see that I was feeling emotional about something, but they could counteract it with truth, with logic, because a lot of times that anxiety is fear. And in spiritual terms, it's like, the enemy will whisper lies to us, and we start to believe those lies. We believe the fear, which is false evidence appearing real. And the truth is love is the only thing that's real. And when we are in that state of fear, that is our cry for love, that we need that support, and to be able to recognize that. And we can give that to ourselves when we start to learn what those word tracks are that are going on in our head, and then we can replace that to help us feel self-assured. And a lot of times we need somebody else to initiate that spark within us. Because if you grew up in an environment like me, I didn't even know this other stuff was possible. What, you mean people say nice things and support you and I'm not always the one that's wrong? What? I didn't know that was possible. Really? Huh? So these things, you often, if you don't know it's possible, you need at least somebody to show you a different way of looking at it, a different way of reframing something in order for you to know that it's possible. And the first time that you hear that, I promise you, you always remember that person that first told you. And it doesn't matter if they're repeating it from somebody else that wrote this famous book or whatever. If you heard it from them, they are the person that made a difference to you. This is why everybody's voice is important, because the way I explain something may not resonate with everybody. But if it resonates with you, then I hope you're actually able to take something from what I'm saying, and that maybe you're hearing this for the first time and you have a different perspective shift, which is basically a miracle, right? When you can all of a sudden see things that used to hold you down, that made you feel stuck and made you feel like a prisoner in your own mind. And you're feeling anxious because you don't know how to get out of this stuff. And if something that I've shared with you today has helped you see that in a different perspective, that gives you pause or cause to think of it. Maybe it's not hitting right now as we speak, but maybe a week from now or a month from now, you'll be like, oh, that's what the hell she was talking about. I get it now. That's okay. It doesn't have to hit all right now. But if you are finding that there's something here for you, that when you come and you listen to the trainings that I'm sharing here, and you're going away just somehow feeling lighter, but you're not sure why, then just keep coming back, okay? And something will click for you. And I do these trainings every day at 9 p.m. If you are joining in and it's towards the end of the training, I want you to hop over to my YouTube channel, which is Coach Tina B 125. You can catch the replays of the training. I've uploaded all of those there. You will see I do artwork as well, and there's links there if you choose to purchase the artwork. The thumbnails are all the artwork. You always feel lighter and cathartic too. Oh, thank you, Mark. It's always good to see you coming back. Thank you. Yeah, I dressed up for church today, so it was a really good session. So guys, I really hope that was helpful. If there's certain trainings or anything that you are facing, any challenges, let me know and I'll create a training and we'll talk about that. I'll share some of my experience, strength and hope of how I was able to get through those things, in hopes that you are able to get through that as well. Okay guys, I hope you have an amazing night and we will talk to you again tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye.